history to our Thursday seminars, it runs all the way from the 90s, where actually we had regular Thursday seminars before. And anyway, we welcome you all. Thank you very much for coming. We have a special guest today, who is actually a regular. He's not missed any of the yearly seminars. He delivers his seminars every year, usually on his home leave when he comes to India to visit his family, and takes time off to come to ICRISAT to deliver a seminar almost every year since the time that he was even in CIMIT, right? And I think he does that even when he was in Erie. So a special guest today is Dr. Prabhu Pingali, and I have my notes here, but perhaps I know him enough so I don't need it. So I would say that Prabhu requested that this be an informal seminar, so I will introduce him informally. His new position right now, as you will see, is the professor and director at Cornell University. He's now the Tata-Cornell and Nutrition Initiative and director, and he started barely a month ago. And you know him very well from his 5-year stint in BMGF. He was responsible and as a champion of the Village Dynamics in South Asia project. Before that, I would say it goes back as now, more than 30, when Prabhu and I actually grew up together, not as small boys and girls, but very young professionals as students. So we were classmates, and we were from the developing country in that, and naturally from developing country classmates, we had a lot of common together, formed study groups and so on and so on. So as soon as we finished, we parted ways. He went to the World Bank, I went back to my country and raised. What's nice is when he decided to come to Erie to become the program leader and agriculture economist at the International Rice Research Institute, spent about another 9 years, I didn't imagine, while I was professor of economics and statistics at the university, and had lots of collaborations with Erie, was a visiting scientist there sometime, especially at the time when he was there. Okay, and one of those pathways is the fact that in the early 90s, I was invited to ICRISAT, and he said, let's exchange villages. I'm from Hyderabad, you're from Los Baños, let's just exchange. So he was the first person who really encouraged me to come to ICRISAT, and for that matter, I asked all questions, and everything that he said, which is very important to me, was that I had a lot of hesitation, and he said, just spend 6 months in Hyderabad, and after 6 months you love it, you'll never go away. And I didn't know because I intended to stay only for 2 years, but what he said happened because after 20 years I'm still here. So Prabhu went on from director of economics program, and from there to FAO as the leader of the what's the group there? Economics program in FAO, and FAO went to BMGF, and from BMGF now director and professor of the Tata-Cornell Agriculture and Nutrition Initiative at Cornell University. At this stage, Prabhu is actually going around the villages, going through a thoughtful process of identifying the program of agriculture and nutrition, new program, as he is the first director, to see the priority areas that Cornell University will be involved in agriculture, addressing the agriculture and nutrition nexus. And we see that we will find a lot of common interest and a lot of overlaps with respect to the priorities that we have at ICRISAT. And that's what we're talking about here. And we hope that in this thought process, he will actually deliver his vision and strategy, the emerging issues that has come about in his thought process as he has been in travel around Maharashtra so far. He's just in the midway. He's going to Bhubaneswar tomorrow and so on. And after this, we hope that he will settle down on a set of high priority areas which we can discuss for collaboration. Prabhu?
Oh, as an economist, it takes me time to figure out machines. Thank you, Cynthia. This is a great chance to come back to ICRISAT. I always like to do my annual talk in ICRISAT. It gives me a chance to come back to my roots. And this is where I started, and it's nice to come back. Although it seems like every time I show up, I'm in a different job. So this time I'm starting up a new program, as Cynthia said, and I've been in this job since June 1st, so just brand new, just starting off, and what I'm going to talk about is very much in exploratory and a reflective mood today, and also a chance for me to get as much advice and wisdom from you as I think through this program. Before I start, let me introduce Bhaskar Mitra here. Bhaskar is the Associate Director of the Tata-Cornell program, and Bhaskar is based in Mumbai, and so he manages all our operations out of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. I don't know how many of you know about the Tata-Cornell program, so let me start from the very basics. A few years ago, Ratan Tata made an endowment to Cornell University. And many of you will say, why Cornell? And that's because Ratan Tata actually graduated from Cornell University sometime in the 1950s, 57 or something like that. And so this was a gift back to his alma mater. And the endowment was for $50 million. And of the $50 million, $25 million was targeted towards scholarships for Indian students to study in Cornell. And this is Indian students doing bachelor's degree in pretty much any subject matter. There was no restrictions. There are no restrictions. And there is a competitive process in India for selecting students and putting them through to Cornell University. And that process is separate from what I do. The second part of the endowment, the other $25 million, was targeted towards setting up a campus-wide research program and a campus-wide institution. That's the institution that's called the Tata-Cornell Agriculture and Nutrition Initiative. And the idea behind this program is to address the one vexing issue that attracted the interest of Mr. Tata, which is, why is it that you've got a country that's growing so rapidly, where overall economic growth's been around 7 to 8% per annum for a couple of decades now. But at the same time, malnutrition continues to be stubbornly high, poverty continues to be stubbornly high, and we've not been able to get beyond the sticky nature of poverty and malnutrition in India. And so the overall program is designed to address this fundamental puzzle that we face in India today, and to look at the role of agriculture as one of the pathways of coming out of this problem. So that's essentially what this program is setting out to do. And I've been fortunate to have been selected as the founding director for this program. One other thing I want to mention before I get going on my thought process is that the program itself is driven by student research. So with an endowment of 25 million, basically what we do is we identify bright young students to come to India and to spend a significant amount of their time addressing issues around this pathway from agriculture to nutrition, and to come back to Cornell with that thesis research done for a PhD or for a master's degree. So essentially, the manpower, the human power behind the program is young students and their intellectual capacity, and that's what's going to drive us as we look forward in this program. Let me start first by saying that, when we think about setting up a program targeted towards India, it's quite an amazing opportunity because India is such a complex country. You've got an emerging India and then you've got a lagging India. You've got an emerging India which is growing very rapidly. High economic growth rates, a rising urban middle class, but at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, stubbornly high poverty rates, stubbornly high malnutrition rates, particularly in rural environments. You've got an India that's a pioneer in terms of the Green Revolution, and books have been written about how India made the Green Revolution happen, how India became food self-sufficient, etc. But then there are large areas of India with low agriculture productivity. And I spent the last week driving through eastern Maharashtra and to get a real first-hand impression of the low productivity levels in the semi-arid tropics. And this week we're going to be in Orissa and then Jharkhand, and again driving through some of the most depressed agricultural areas in this country. So we've got these lagging areas, and we've not been able to crack the productivity barriers in these areas. India has very strong R&D capacity, public sector, but growing strength in private sector R&D. Companies like Mahiko, Nirmal Seeds, etc. are becoming major leaders in R&D. But at the same time, there's very little R&D investment that's taking place in crops and in traits that are important to the poor. And that's been a major concern and continues to be a major concern. If you live anywhere in Hyderabad city, and if you've been here for the last 10 years, you'll notice that around your house, supermarkets have been coming up like crazy. My house is in Secunderabad in Boinpalli, and I counted 10 years ago there were 0 supermarkets. Today I can walk to 10 of them from my house. And my house is not even in the center of the city. And that seems to be the trend across urban India. Across urban India, you've got rapid urbanization, rapid diet change, westernization of diets taking place, supermarkets coming in, etc. But then you also have rural India where traditional markets dominate, rural infrastructure is poor, road infrastructure is poor, and getting access to markets is one of the big constraints. Now, one thing I am noticing today is literacy is rising, especially literacy for girls is rising. When you go to any little village in India and you look into a classroom, you see more girls than you see boys. And that change is quite dramatic. But what's surprising is that rising literacy is not converting itself into empowerment of women. Women continue to be disempowered, especially in rural communities. And that's holding back a large part of the development process today in India. But I see, as I look at India and the future of India, I see great opportunities for an agriculture renaissance. And I see a great opportunity for an agriculture renaissance for several reasons. But first is that not since the Green Revolution have we seen a real serious turnaround in political commitment to agriculture. For the first time, you hear and you see a lot more political recognition and increased investments that are taking place for agriculture, particularly in eastern India and particularly in the lagging parts of central India, etc. You see that also in terms of road transport infrastructure. We've driven up to today. I drove all the way from Aurangabad through Maharashtra, all the way up to Wardha and down to Hyderabad. And so I have a real first-hand look at what's been happening to rural infrastructure. And even in Maharashtra, the roads were quite good. But once you cross the border from Maharashtra into Andhra Pradesh, the roads are just fantastic. And that level of infrastructure investments that's taking place here in Andhra Pradesh, you see that translated into productivity growth that's taking place in the so-called lagging parts of the state. So when ICRSAT was first started in 1974, Mahbubnagar and Adilabad and Warangal and all these areas were considered the most depressing parts of Andhra Pradesh, and this is where the semi-arid tropics were, the poor lived, etc. But today I think many of these districts are leading and they're moving very rapidly. And I come from Krishna district in the coastal part of Andhra Pradesh where the Green Revolution took place. And if I compare Krishna district to Mahbubnagar district today, the differences are enormous. Mahbubnagar district is moving so much faster than Krishna district is. And there's a huge lesson to be learned here, not just in terms of the role of technology, but the role of infrastructure and the role of political commitment for making development happen. We can talk about that some more as we go along. Thanks. Great. I personally believe that the third item on my list, provisioning the urban middle classes, is going to be one of the key elements to the revitalization of agriculture in India and to the revitalization of smallholder agriculture in India. This is an area where I believe there's enormous opportunity for looking at models for connecting smallholders to the broader value chains, to the market systems, to the supermarket system, etc. And we've already seen fairly dramatic successes in the way smallholders have been incorporating themselves into the seed value chain. And there's some good examples of smallholders connecting into horticulture, vegetable value chains, etc. But this is a big area and one that needs a lot of attention as we look ahead. I don't have to tell you about the role of innovations here in ICRSAT, but this dramatic change is taking place, especially in terms of genomics and the whole area of biofortification. And that can have some major impacts on addressing the needs of the poor and finally getting biotechnology to make a difference as far as the food crops of the poor goes. Cell phones and ICTs, that's an amazing change that we've seen in the most recent past. The way in which cell phones have spread across rural India is just spectacular. You see rural landless women taking a break from transplanting rice and talking on their cell phones. And wherever we go, I always used to ask people, say, raise your hands if you don't have a cell phone. Not if you have a cell phone, if you don't have a cell phone. And it's often 2 or 3 people who raise their hands to say they don't have a cell phone. That's the extent of spread that we've seen with cell phones. The challenge for us is how do you convert that into a mechanism for transferring knowledge, for transferring information, and for making agriculture smarter as we look ahead. The last area is on the feminization of agriculture. There's a lot said about feminization of agriculture. But what I find really striking is that as you go through village after village in India, you're beginning to see village level self-help groups that are coming up. And self-help groups that have been set up by women, managed by women. And these self-help groups are doing everything from managing credit, managing production and the connection between producers and markets, to also having self-help groups looking at behavior change, looking at ways in which women raise children, the way in which they improve the nutrition for children, overall health status, etc. And I think these self-help groups are becoming a major vehicle by which you're beginning to see a new type of empowerment of women taking place in rural communities. That's still a hypothesis, but the extent to which these self-help groups are growing is just incredible. This state is one of the leaders in setting up village-level self-help groups for women. And I think as ICROSAT works in these villages, it'll be important for you to figure out what's the best mechanism to connect with these groups and to see if you can work with them in order to get your agenda, but also to contribute to their agenda. Now let me move on to looking at this connection that I've been entrusted to work on, the connection between agriculture and nutrition. So when I was with the Gates Foundation, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the pathway between agriculture and nutrition. And so I'm starting off with what we learned at the Gates Foundation in looking at this pathway. And we essentially started off by saying, when you think about the pathway from agriculture to nutrition, that pathway goes through household income. Productivity growth leading to poverty reduction, improved income, which then leads to improved access to food, etc. And eventually getting to individual improvements in nutrition. Of course, we all know that that's not a linear pathway, and that there's several areas where this pathway breaks down. And that's how we started to look at all of the factors along this chain that lead to the pathway breaking down, and how do we strengthen that. So essentially, as you look along, you have agriculture level interventions and other interventions along the pathway that are necessary. Price policy, overall government policy plays a very important role in the way in which agriculture productivity manifests itself in terms of improved incomes and poverty reduction. But then as you get from income to household access, there's several other factors that come in. Local level prices, local level availability of food, opportunities for fortification of food, opportunities for biofortification, the extent to which diversity of diets, diversity of food supply is available, etc. All of these play major roles in terms of access to food. And now, as you think about government policies, the role of the PDS system comes in terms of access, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The role of NREGA comes in, etc. But then once you go from household access to individual food intake, there's a fairly significant barrier between improved access to food at the household level to having intra-household equity in terms of access to food, especially women's access to food and children's access to food. And once you get to that level, a lot of the issues are beyond what traditional economists are concerned with. You get to issues around gender empowerment and household behavior, demographics, etc. We were sitting in a village in Akola district, and we were talking to a group of women about how food is allocated within the household. And the women were quite articulate. They were saying, well, after we feed our husband, and after we feed all the other men, and then after we feed all the children, whatever is left is what we eat. So if there's any vegetable left, then we eat the vegetable. If there's any pulses left, we eat those pulses. So we end up eating whatever is left. Now that's a behavior that then leads to certain nutritional consequences. Now, unless you change that behavior, you're not going to see a change in the nutritional consequences. We went to another village where the self-help group actually recognized that this was a problem, and they took a considerable amount of time and effort to try and reverse this tendency. So there, when we talked to the women, they said, oh, we all sit together, we all eat together. And that whole village sort of got into this new habit of saying, we sit together, we eat together. That's a culture change, a behavior change. But a large part of the problem we face in nutrition in India is really tied to gender empowerment and culture and behavior around food and the way food is distributed, the way food is eaten, etc. But then after you have individual access to food and individual food intake, the next big constraint is, does that make a difference in terms of nutrition in your body? Does your body absorb the increased food and generate improved nutrition? And here you've got a whole set of non-agricultural constraints that come into play. And the primary non-agricultural constraints are related to sanitation and hygiene and clean drinking water. There's been some interesting work recently looking at access to toilets and access to sanitation facilities and their impact on nutrition. And I think that's an area where the agriculture community needs to take a lot more attention. Not so much in trying to expand your work into sanitation, but trying to bring complementary investments into areas where agriculture investments are taking place. If we want to make a difference on nutrition, we do need to crack the issue of better sanitation, water supply, clean water, drinking water, etc. And then you've got a whole set of issues around food safety. In Africa, aflatoxin was a major problem. So even if you had enough maize, if that maize had high levels of aflatoxin contamination, it resulted in serious nutritional disorders. Similar problems are there in other crops in India. And the way you address them and the way you tackle food safety is going to be a major challenge. So, as you think about this pathway, going from productivity improvement to individual nutrition improvement, one can look at various strategies for addressing that agriculture nutrition nexus. And a lot of what I'll be talking about now is talking about some of those strategies. And I group those strategies into 4 broad areas. So sort of agriculture-led growth strategies, which essentially look at ways in which you improve smallholder productivity, ways in which you connect farmers to markets, and improve overall rural income, rural employment opportunities. Second is a group of strategies which I call the food-based strategies. And here there are opportunities for biofortification, diversification of crops, using home gardens, backyard dairy production, other livestock production, etc. The third is around behavior change. Behavior change essentially around women's empowerment, child feeding habits, intra-household distribution of food, food safety and handling practices. And the fourth area is around sanitation and hygiene, clean drinking water, sanitation facilities. I would say these are the 4 big, broad components of any strategy that you'd have that tries to bring agriculture and nutrition together. And there's a lot of work that goes on individually. The challenge, of course, has always been, how do you bring all of these together into one place, into one village, into one community, and have these multiple strategies focused on the same community and working together. There's a lot of work in India also along all these strategies. If you go to Delhi and talk to any of the big decision makers about nutrition issues, they'll tell you, yeah, we know a lot about that. We are concerned about it. The Prime Minister himself has spoken out loudly about the issue of malnutrition in India, etc. And there are lots of different programs going on. Some good, some bad, but one cannot say that the government is not focused on it and not putting a lot of investments in it. I tried to get a quick set of those programs up here along that value chain from agriculture to nutrition. You've got a whole bunch of programs around the income side. The NREGA program, the Rural Livelihood Mission, I can never figure out what this is. This is the Rashtriya Krishi, which is related to increasing smallholder productivity, and the National Health Mission, I think, Horticulture Mission. You can see Bhaskar fill this out. Then you've got on the food access side, you've got the PDS going on and the Food Security Mission. And on the individual access, again, you've got PDS and the midday meal scheme and a whole bunch of other child-related schemes. And individual nutrition side, so set of activities around improving nutrition, improving knowledge around nutrition, knowledge around feeding habits, etc. But also a big program around improving sanitation, water and sanitation issues and total sanitation, etc. So there's lots of different activities going on. It's not clear what impact they're having at the ground level, and it's not clear how they're connecting to each other, etc. And that's something that's worth looking at as you pick a few locations. So ICROSAT has its villages that it's been working on for a long time. And it'll be good to say, let's take a few of those villages and look at all of these programs in those villages and see how they're connecting up and whether they're actually making a difference in terms of getting to improved nutrition. Now, in addition to all of the Government of India programs, the donor community itself has been quite active in this area. There's a whole host of programs that the donors have been supporting, and I don't have the full list here, obviously, but certainly the Gates Foundation has been supporting CISA. Then the Gates Foundation again has been supporting Poshan. I think I keep saying Gates Foundation, but again, biofortification is a big part of what the foundation and others have been supporting. DFID has been supporting LANSA, which is a way in which you're deliberately trying to influence behavior change. And the Gates Foundation has been supporting this work on tackling the agriculture nutrition divide. I know that the World Bank's Sapansi program is missing from this list, and there must be a whole bunch of other ones missing from this list. So the donor community itself is very actively involved in all of this. So we are coming into this story as a US-based university, asking ourselves, what do we do with our small endowment in this space that's really crowded? It's crowded with a lot of government interest and government attention. It's crowded with a lot of donor interest and attention. So what can we do here that'll make any difference to anybody? So that's the challenge that we're on. So we started our visit here, my second month in this job. We started off in we flew to Aurangabad and then drove down to Pachora. And then from Pachora to Akola to Amravati to Sevagram, and now we're in Hyderabad. So we've covered about 1,500 kilometers up to now. And essentially what we're trying to do is get a bottom-up perspective on what are the issues that small communities in rural India are facing, both on the agriculture side but also on the nutrition side. And what are some of the priority areas that we should be addressing as we try to look across these communities and try to kind of find some common themes that impact these communities and that can lead to interventions to figure out how to change their situation. So we started off with, we went to Nirmal Seeds and spent a couple of days with Nirmal Seeds. Nirmal Seeds is familiar to Mr. Rai, but to others of you. A really strong private seed company that's now become a major player in the area of biofortification. And it does give you a really good example of public-private sector partnership. From there we spent a day with the ICROSAT villages in Akola district, where Cynthia Bantalan and her team have been following this group of farmers since 1976. So it's an enormous data set that gives us very rich information on how these communities have changed across generations, across 3 generations. And so we spent a great day with them, drove up to Amravati and went to this Melghat area with all tribal populations up in the hills in Maharashtra, and looked at the ways in which these very small, very poor tribal communities have been relating to the changing food systems and transformation of agriculture that's been taking place around them. Then to Sevagram, looking at the way in which there's been this interaction between health and agriculture, working with medical doctors who've been working with communities, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Medical Sciences, and looking at some of those interactions. And now we're here. What we plan to do is go from here to Orissa, to 2 sites in Orissa, then up to Ranchi, and earlier this year we spent a few days up in Patna. So by the end of this tour, we hope to have visited 15 locations across this area in India. And what we're doing in each of these locations is spending a large part of our time sitting with farmers, groups of farmers, and talking with them. Basically trying to do a semi-structured sort of discussion around their agriculture practices, their overall development issues, their nutrition practices, behavior issues, etc. And get as much information as we can across these communities, and then build that up into a set of priority research areas. And then we hope to check in with other groups such as yourself, to see if you're getting this right, if there are things that we're totally off on, if there are areas where we could figure out how to collaborate with each other, etc. So that's what we're doing on this. So as we progress, and last week we were getting ready to drive from Maharashtra to Andhra Pradesh, and Uttam, sitting over there, said, "Oh, by the way, Cynthia wants you to give a seminar in ICRSAT on Monday." And so this was Friday, and so sitting in the car, we quickly put together this PowerPoint presentation. So what you've got is a draft of something that we're thinking about, and it's certainly not a final version. But what we're thinking about is, again, in this four broad categories, thinking through what are some of the themes that have been emerging up to now in our trip. And as we go forward, we'll keep refining and working on them. And the themes are very much along those 4 buckets that I talked about: agriculture-led growth, food-based solution, behavior change, sanitation, and hygiene. And let me talk through each of them. So first, let's talk about agriculture and agriculture growth and nutrition impacts. I think it's become quite clear to us as we drove through Maharashtra and into Andhra that you do see significant commercialization of agriculture taking place. So if you just think about the villages that ICRSAT has been monitoring in Akola district in Maharashtra, those villages in Akola district have become very commercial cotton, soybean producing districts, villages. They're not subsistence food crop producing villages anymore. And even if you go up to the hills in Melghat, all of that area has become soybean cotton producing area. And even the tribal populations are more used now to selling their soybean and cotton and buying food rather than having a subsistent production system. So that's a big paradigm shift from where we all were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think it's time for us to get to see that change in thinking in ourselves and in our own narrative about agriculture in rural India. Because that change is taking place. And 1,500 kilometers of driving through this area and seeing soybean and cotton after soybean and cotton convinced me that smallholders in India are just as commercial as anybody else. Small, but commercial. And so that's a big change. I think the question for us is, what difference does it make to the status of nutrition for women and children? There's a lot of discussion about once you have cash, the cash goes to lots of other things, including alcohol, and very little gets to food on the table. So here's an opportunity through the ECROSAT villages and other data to try and really answer that question, whether commercial agriculture makes a big difference in terms of nutrition, especially for women or children or not. And we have a graduate student coming from Cornell next week, and she'll be based in Chandrapur district in Maharashtra, and she's going to specifically look at this question, and she'll start answering that issue. The second big theme that came out is about labor. I mean, I don't think we've been to one community where when you ask the question, what's the most important problem that you have? And they did not say it's labor. Every single community we went to said getting adequate amount of labor is the single biggest problem that they have. And wage rates have been rising. They've been rising rapidly. If you talk to people, they'll say this is because of the Narega program or whatever. But I think it's more than that. I think there's an overall structural change that's taking place in Indian agriculture. There's the net withdrawal of labor out of agriculture that's taking place, and you're beginning to see the results of that. And you can see that in the children. You talk to any of the mothers with children and ask them, are your children going to be here on the farm once they grow up? The answer is absolutely not. No kid is going to be on the farm. And that's true today, but I think that was true 10 years ago, and that was true 15 years ago. And that's the change that we're beginning to see. And it's time for us to say, what does that mean for the organization and management of agriculture? I think the simple answer is, should we be looking at labor-saving technologies, mechanization, non-mechanization, etc. But I think the long-term issues around what does this mean for the structure of agriculture production is a really important question to ask in terms of the way agriculture is organized, etc. But for the immediate period, a lot more needs to be done on labor-saving techniques. And then the impact of that labor-saving techniques on female labor, and what that means for income of landless women and overall nutrition levels. So the next set of interactions is around food-based interventions. And I think going to Nirmal Seeds was really interesting personally, because it just gave me a first-hand impression of the importance of biofortified food. I knew it was there, but I didn't get a good enough sense until I actually saw this on the ground. And the idea of building on a successful pearl millet variety that's already on the ground, already adopted at high level, and adding high iron to that really makes a difference. And when we talk to many of the farmers in that area, there seems to be a lot of interest in biofortification, and especially around the pearl millet. So I think that's an area that I certainly would feel there's huge opportunities to understand what are the constraints to adoption, what are the constraints to disseminating, what are the opportunities for building public-private sector partnerships in this area. and just working through with a few companies and seeing how this process evolves over a period of time. What's the role of government policy in either promoting it or hampering it? You know, there's a lot of government policy that's actually hampering progress with private sector movement of technology, and whether one can address that and see how you can move forward with improving it. I think there's a second big area which is looking beyond pearl millets, looking at some of the biofortification efforts that are taking place with rice, etc., through the Harvest Plus program, and look at, in an ex ante sense, at potential impacts, potential pathways for moving forward in this area, etc. A third area in terms of food-based interventions that Cornell started to work on is in the use of goats and smallholder goat systems, and using goat milk, etc., in the diet. And that's something Cornell's been working in Rajasthan, but we'll see how we move forward in that area. But one area that I've become personally intrigued by on this trip is this whole issue of the public distribution system. The fact that public distribution system is now so pervasive across the country, and that you've got this government stores in every little village. And the reality, despite all the rhetoric around it, is that those stores are actually providing cheap rice and wheat for rural communities. And most rural communities say, yes, we are actually getting it from that store. Now, what does that mean? That means that what we traditionally think about as the hunger season, the season before harvest, when there's not enough food stocks, etc., that's becoming an increasingly obsolete concept for India, because you do have that public distribution system which is providing cheap rice and wheat, and that cheap rice and wheat is available throughout the year. So the way we think about the hunger season and decisions people make around the hunger season is something we'd need to rethink through. The whole seasonality issue is something we'd need to rethink through. But what's also important is, does the provision of cheap rice and wheat lead to a more diversified diet? Because you're getting cheap rice and wheat, you don't have to spend as much on rice and wheat. You can spend what you're saving on vegetables, on fruit, on milk, meat, fish, etc. Is that happening, or could it be happening? Could it happen? And there's a whole set of questions around that public distribution system which are not so much addressed towards, is this leading to corruption, is this leading to bureaucracy, etc., which are all very important questions. But there's a whole set of nutritional consequences that I don't think anybody is looking at. And that's an area where there's a great opportunity. And the third area, as I said, is the area of behavior change. And what impressed me, as I said before, is women's self-help groups. And the way women's self-help groups are now really working across these communities, and opportunities for us to figure out how to work with them. That's something that impressed me a lot. And I'll come back to you after I'm done with the rest of my trip to say whether I've seen this everywhere else. But certainly in Maharashtra and in Andhra Pradesh, these self-help groups have become really very powerful and very strong. But I think as I think about behavior change, something that struck me as I was driving through Maharashtra and I blogged about it, is that, while we as a scientific community have been promoting biofortified food from a traditional perspective of saying traditional farmers eat bajra, so let's make biofortified bajra so they can continue eating biofortified bajra, I think there's a different angle that we need to take. Because if you talk to young kids in a village, the last thing they want to do is eat bajra, right? They say, we don't want to eat bajra. Bajra no rotis? No way. We want wheat rotis. We want rice. We want to eat potato chips. We don't want to eat bajra. So, I think the way you want to approach biofortified bajra is not through the traditional means, but to figure out a way in which rural young people will find this to be a fancy food, something that they aspire to eat. What do rural young kids want to eat? They want to eat what urban middle class young people eat. Rural young people want to eat the same thing young people in your families want to eat. They want a pizza, they want potato chips, they want cookies, they want soft drinks. They go to the local kiosk to buy all the stuff that your kids will buy when they go to a store. We should not expect rural kids to be any different from our own kids. And if you think in that sense, we need to figure out a way to make biofortified food appealing to young urban populations, which then comes back to appealing to rural populations. Is this possible? Yes, it is. Think about quinoa. 20 years ago, nobody in the US heard about quinoa. Today, in US households, people have quinoa as it's a normal part of their diet. Once a week, once a month, whatever. But quinoa is part of the diet. You go into the local grocery store, you can buy quinoa. Now that is a change that took place because the agro-food industry found a commodity, found a nutritional value for it, and then created a whole campaign around. I think that kind of campaign is possible, and there's a way in which Dr. Rai should work with the agro-food industry and figure out how to make that happen. I think that's the future for biofortification. And maybe it's just a dream, but that's something that I believe is possible. The other area I think is in the use of digital technology. We are talking about behavior change. I think there's a huge opportunity for using digital videos, using the web, etc., to actually scale up behavior change. And if you think that's not doable, I'd like to invite you to check a website called Digital Green. Digital Green is a company that started from nowhere, started about 5 years ago. Today it has a viewership of close to 1 million people. It's got about several thousand videos up on the web. All of these videos have been made by farmers. All of these videos have been made actually by farm women talking to other farmers, talking about what they're doing, their practices, etc. And these videos are being downloaded by communities across India and by others, of course. It's one of the most amazing experiences in the use of digital technology. And I think that's possible. And there's a huge opportunity to build on experiences like that. The last area is around drinking water and sanitation. And here, actually, Cornell started to do some work in Jharkhand, where we've been working with a company, a Cornell spin-off company called Agua Clara, which has designed a village-based water purification system, which you can't see very clearly here. But basically this has got some sand filters, and then it's got a set of chambers through which water flows to remove all the sediment, etc. And then it goes through a chemical purification system, and then that feeds into a water system for drinking water. And at the end of the process, you get EPA, US EPA standard drinking water in rural areas. And working with the Tata Trust, Cornell has set up one of these plants, or in the process of setting up one of these plants in Jharkhand. And there's been good interest from UNICEF and others to see how one can scale this up to other locations. This technology actually has worked quite well in Honduras, where it was first piloted. And all of the material in these plants is available locally. The only thing that's not available locally is the chemicals for the purification process, but those are available within the district or within a close neighborhood, etc. So that's a scheme that holds promise, and it's something that we're looking at. But what's interesting from our point of view is to say, once you've got that drinking water, what change does it make in terms of nutritional status? And the next thing we want to also look at is improved access to toilets, and the implication of that improved access to toilets for nutritional outcomes. This is the bit on the Agua Clara story, but I think I told you that already, so let's continue. And from a personal point of view, I continue to be someone who's fascinated by metrics, and that's not very usual, but that's my life. And I want to figure out a few metrics issues in this area. And I think one of the big metrics issues that I want to address is, every time we look at an agriculture survey, and agriculture surveys are very detailed about everything to do with agriculture. How much fertilizer did you use? Where did you apply it? Timing, etc., etc. But then they're terrible at anything that has nothing to do with agriculture. So if you're trying to do agriculture and nutrition, I can find a dozen very good agriculture surveys, but none of them have anything to do with nutrition. Similarly, I can find a dozen nutrition surveys that tell me nothing about agriculture. So what I'm trying to do is to say, is there on one piece of paper, on one page, can I have one set of questions, a minimum set of questions that will give me information on the nutritional status of agriculture households? Not a lot of questions, but just one page that can be added to an agriculture survey. Similarly, is there one page that gives me a minimum set of information on agriculture that can be added to a nutrition survey? So that way, if we can get this minimum data set on agriculture, minimum data set on nutrition, etc., we can try and latch these minimum data sets onto more detailed surveys that are sector specific. And that way we'll be able to get a much more comprehensive database that will allow us to track this pathway from agriculture to nutrition. That's something that I'm interested in trying to figure out. The second area is to put in place in a few locations a truly multidimensional survey. A multidimensional survey that has health and education and nutrition and agriculture and all of these parameters together, so that you get a full comprehensive view of a village, of a household in a few locations. The standard for that is the World Bank's Living Standards Measurement Survey. So if we can do something like that, that would be really useful. So let me finish by saying Among the other things I want to do while I'm on this tour is also to identify potential collaborators that we can work with. There's a whole bunch of people we've been interacting with, and we'd like to see how we can build up these relationships. Certainly ICRISAT is one of the places where I think is a natural fit for us, and I'd like to see how we can build a long-term relationship with ICRISAT. Have an opportunity for Cornell students to come spend time here, work with people here, be out in the field, etc. Certainly look at opportunities to do the same thing the other way, but also have opportunities for people like myself to come spend significant amounts of time doing some on-the-ground work from here. So these are some of the things we're thinking about. As I said earlier, this is about halfway point for our trip, and we leave tomorrow for Orissa. So I promised Cynthia by the end of the trip I will come just very quickly to say, did I get everything right, or am I going to change some things, etc. And also build up a collaborative relationship with ICRISAT before I take off. Thank you, Cynthia. I'll stop here. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Can we have the lights on so that we see each other? Right, thanks. The floor is now open for questions. I'm sure there are a lot. Yes, Janila.
Thank you so much for those wonderful thoughts. I have two questions.
I can't hear you actually.
I have two questions. Like, where do you think this post-harvest technology and the food processing fit into this agriculture nutrition pathway? That's question number one. And the second one is regarding, are our expectations very high over this cell phone technology revolution, given the fact that we ourselves have seen that increase in literacy just doesn't translate into enhanced empowerment?
Good questions, both. On post-harvest, I think there's huge opportunities. I didn't spend enough time looking at it yet, but we did visit a couple of dal mills which were being run by small rural communities, etc. I think there's opportunities, one on the labor saving side, especially as you look at pulses, dal, other diversified diet areas where much of the post-harvest is done by women and it's very labor intensive, etc. So there's huge opportunities on the labor saving side of the story. But I think there's also big opportunities on food safety, especially on control of mycotoxins, etc. But we haven't spent enough time on that yet. But it's something that, from my previous job at the Gates Foundation, it's something I've been quite aware of, and it's something we'll continue to look at. On IT, I tend to agree with you on cell phones. And that's why I didn't deliberately talk about the use of cell phones itself when I talked about interventions. I think the idea of digital videos is a different story, because here you're not talking about reaching one individual, you're talking about reaching a group, reaching a community, and have, through this self-help empowerment process, having the videos as part of that behavior change process. That's, I think, the way I was thinking about it. There are also opportunities to have producer groups within a village having better access to price information, etc. Again, at a group level, that can work through cell phones. But major efforts around the use of cell phones per se to send messages directly to farmers, etc. I haven't seen really successful examples of that yet. So I tend to agree on that.
Yeah, thanks for the nice overview on agriculture and nutrition. I wonder if you have looked at entrepreneurship as one of the innovations which can be brought in, especially at the micro, small, medium level, whether it deals directly with food production, value addition to food, or
Yeah.
even things like digital communication.
Yeah. And I think relating to the last question, post-harvest is one area where that's possible. And what we've actually seen is the way small entrepreneurs are starting to use mills as a way of promoting local business, not for rice or wheat, but for pulses, etc. So that's an opportunity one can think about. And the rest, yeah, I'm not quite sure. We'll see as we go along. But I'm not quite sure what. See, there are things that are areas where I can say, okay, this is an area where Cornell University would have a comparative advantage. And these are areas where a development agency has a comparative advantage or a government has a comparative advantage. So as we do this trip, I've been screening out things which are more a development agency type activity relative to an institution whose main comparative advantage is research and R&D and bringing students in to do work, etc. So some things are getting dropped out of my screen because of that differentiation. Yeah. Do you want a mic? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a grant that I made when I was with the Gates Foundation called Tandy 2, which was given to IGIDR, the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. It's called Tackling Agriculture and Nutrition Divide in India. And that basically looks across all of the districts in India and sort of categorizes districts in India by their nutrition level, and then tries to look at the role of agriculture productivity, infrastructure, literacy, all of that together. So that's really addressing your question. But if you just look at Punjab, Haryana, etc., they have much higher nutrition levels than Bihar and Orissa. So in a very casual sense, you do see the difference. But then you've got a state like Gujarat that sticks out there. Gujarat has very high malnutrition levels, much higher than Bihar. So you say, what's going on? So there's a bunch of questions that that need to be addressed as we look at this. I mean, there are about 200 PhD theses that can come out of this work. There's a lot of unanswered questions.
Prabhu, given sheer scale, there's nothing to beat the government programs, PDS, the Food Security Bill, and so on. We have successes in certain states and some success, not so such failures in other states. So this convergence of agriculture and nutrition, there are obviously lessons to be learned from the successful models. Is some of your research going to look at those aspects, because we're really going to talk of scale over there?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The only limitation is the data for doing that, right? And if all of these programs had a minimum data set that they were tracking, we can answer these questions. But as far as I know, most of these programs have very little data associated with them. So the only way I can answer that set of questions is, ICROSAT has 42 villages across India that it's conducting the same survey. Now, presumably all those 42 villages have a PDS system going. So if I look at across these villages at the PDS system, the effectiveness of it and the access to food from those, etc., maybe that will give me some answers. But I'm not sure, given the sample size of these, the samples in the villages, whether you can actually get to all of the answers. But that's going to be your big limiting factor. Sure. I thought you were bringing this to a close or something.
I still see one or two hands. I'd like to bring the discussion to, I think one of the things that we'll be discussing is collaboration in the future. So maybe let me stimulate the questions in that direction. Particularly ICRISAT and Tata-Cornell initiative. And it definitely will have go beyond the social sciences, although the common thing, questions that we are raising, should definitely include the concerns that biofortification, nutrition, we will have is in terms of breeding, in terms of management, in terms of the social science issues, many of which you have raised already. And of course, that's one. I'd like to just have some more elucidation on that. And the second is towards bringing out maybe strength in the tracking process to produce the metrics. Because ICRISAT started the village level studies in 1975, and you were there at the very beginning, in fact, with a very important mission to understand farmers' behavior, and it was designed that way. It has a sample we're tracked. It's a gem in itself right now because it's 75 to present, tracking these households every 3 weeks about anything under the sun. But I think one of the things that we can think about is this minimum data set, which needs to be institutionalized. Institutionalization means that it has to ride on something that will go on in the long term.
Yeah.
And so if ICRISAT is there for the long term, 100 years is okay, we can think about that. But perhaps the ICRISAT Cornell collaboration can build up and build upon what BDSA has started, but to see that it's institutionalized so that a statistical agency who will be funded by the government of India will actually take it up as a model that will be the basis for establishing that tracking of these matrices.
Yeah. And I think that's an important issue. I've been raising this idea of the minimum data set with a bunch of different people. So what I think would be the next step in this process is to try and bring a group of interested parties together to actually talk through how to do this. Maybe that's something for spring this next year. When it's snowing in Ithaca, I can get out and come here and do that. Have a good discussion around that. And then first figure out what that set is, do some trials. The ICRISAT villages could be a place to do the trial, and then figure out the institutional home for it. It's certainly something worth thinking about. But on the broader issue of collaboration, the Tata-Cornell program is not an economics program. The Tata-Cornell program is actually a cross-university program. And my role, my academic home is in the applied economics department, but my directorship is at the university level. So my role as the Tata-Cornell program director is to bring these linkages across campus to address this problem. So there may be areas where someone with more of a breeding problem needs to be addressed, or someone from the breeding side may want to come in. or someone with more of a water side may want to come in, etc. So those are things we'd look at as we move forward. Some of these areas are areas where I would push it as a thesis advisor or whatever. There are other areas where I play more of a role of a conduit to bring the two parties together. But you can also think about this in a different way. You can think about this as a situation where you may decide that you're interested in finding a young PhD student to do some significant work, and you've got your own money to do this, and you approach us and say, can you help identify someone? And we can provide that link for you also. A Bhaskar can help provide that link for you. So we can make this a two-way street of not just us sending students over here on our own demand, but also for us to play a supply side role of trying to match your needs to certain students at Cornell and try to bring them over to do this. So it can be seen both ways. So I would see this as a long-term collaborative opportunity. One of the things that I've noticed in all these years, both as a donor but also working in the UN and all that, is the number of people who actually know enough about what's going on the ground is getting increasingly small. And so the number of people in donor agencies who've actually had real life experience working in a developing country is quite small. And that seems to be a general problem. So the more we can build up a cadre of young people who understand what the realities of development are, the better it is for all of us. And that's true not just for international students or international community. That's true of Indian community. In an average middle-class Indian household, the number of people who actually understand what agriculture is, what rural areas are like, is also becoming quite small. So here's an opportunity to get more young Indians excited about this, and more young Americans and Europeans excited about it.
Yeah, Prabhu, I guess a couple of somewhat related questions, but related to the theme of urbanization. I mean, you spoke about the fact that,
Yeah.
you know, and we all know the statistics on where the population is going to be, and I guess it brought two thoughts to my mind. One is related to the village level studies. These are all done in basically rural villages. How are we going to understand the dynamics of households in the urban areas? And I don't think we can just draw the simple conclusion that they're the same and people make the same decisions and people act the same way.
Yeah.
And I guess, what are your thoughts? Is that an opportunity that we've missed, or is that an opportunity that we should be thinking about in the future of how we're actually going to understand the dynamics of that, which could be far more diverse
Oh, yeah.
than what's going on around across households in the village?
Yeah.
The other issue that I appreciate your thoughts on is food loss. You didn't mention food loss, and I've seen statistics that 60-70% of the food that's actually ultimately consumed is actually lost between the time it's produced on the land. Now, my perception is that probably the losses in rural communities is much lower than in urban by the time you become an urban consumer. Maybe that's wrong. I don't know if there's statistics. I've never seen statistics comparing a consumer in a rural village versus a consumer in an urban, whether you're seeing different food losses. Assuming that's the case, do we not have an equal, if not even more important opportunity to look at how do we address that in the food chain, simply rather than simply say we're just going to produce more?
Yeah. Both good questions. I wish I had good answers. On the first one, I'm not quite sure where ICRISAT can go. I think some of the work Cynthia and her group have done in tracking people who've left the village and seeing what they're doing and all that, that's useful. but it's been kind of limited in scope. Whether there's an opportunity to do a bit more of figuring out what happens to them when they go into an urban setting may be a start for that. But beyond that, I think there should be in other groups that are working on that. And I'm not quite sure who they are. On the food loss side, I think the real question is, where do you start the measurement? Is it after harvest all the way till you get to the consumer's plate or not? I think there the ecocide villages have an opportunity to take some sampling of figuring out from the point of harvest what are the losses along the food value chain. And it's going to be a standalone type of exercise, but it needs to be done. I agree with you, we just don't have good enough data. That's one area that everybody kind of talks about, but then no one does anything about it.
For Director DDG's question, food loss in developing countries is about 30%, particularly in India and Asian countries, from harvest to consumption, 30%. And then in the developed world, it is from supermarket to the refrigerator to the garbage, it's more than 30%. So that's a big area. If we can really concentrate on that in rural areas.
Maybe. I wish to know where you got your numbers from.
A study by a renowned scientist from US, Jonathan Foley, report, an excellent report.
Okay. I know him.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much for being here, and I hope that our colleagues from Harvest Plus are here, being genuine and
Hi, Sabine.
they're actually the next in line, they'll be actually waiting for what last time we covered last time. So we should thank Prabhu for this innovative conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.